Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're glad that you're joining us today. Bit of introduction. Who's talking at you today? My name is Kevin Warner. I am the Director of ESG Certifications and Strategy, overseeing all of the sustainable ag certifications at SCS Global Services, including a lot of external standards like Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade and EFI, and the internal standards like Sustainably Grown, Veriflora, Responsibly Managed Peatlands. I'm joined today by Alex Judd, who is Technical Manager for Sustainable Agriculture. He runs the operations for all of our in-house standards and is an expert in Sustainably Grown. So he's going to lead on discussing what's changed with the new version of the standard. He's going to talk a lot in a little while, so I'm going to keep going on my end and give a brief overview of SCS and the Sustainably Grown standard, and then we're going to really dig into what's new with this program. A little bit of background on SCS Global Services. We've been around for close to 40 years, and we started off in agriculture and have expanded into a lot of different directions over the past 4 decades, where we work in forestry and fishery and mining. We do a lot of work in climate services. We have a consultancy. We have a standards development organization. The through line in all the work we do, though, is we're really focused on sustainability across sectors. If there's work in sustainability, we're part of it. And to that end, we started in California. Our headquarters are still in the Bay Area, but we have representation and presence on every continent in most countries. So we are a global company now, even though 40 years ago, we were working in pesticide residue testing in California. We've really grown quite a bit in that time. In terms of our food and ag work, this is just a sampling, but we cover a wide range of training and consulting, food safety, food labeling, and sustainable ag programs. This is not comprehensive. We do more than this, but we have a wide base of work and a wide scope of knowledge in this area. So that's SCS. Why we're all here today, though, is the Sustainably Grown program. I'll give a brief intro to this, but then we'll dig into version 3.0. Sustainably Grown has been around for around 15 years and has evolved quite a bit in that time. The impetus for its development was that there was not a comprehensive and universal sustainable ag program in the market. There were programs that specialized in certain geographies or certain crops, and we saw a need for some standardization and the development of a program that could be applied for a range of settings and use cases. Our program is broken into 3 main pillars encompassing governance, sustainable environmental practices, and social protection, ethical stewardship. And what's unique about it is that it can be applied across a range of geographies and cropping systems. We have heavy representation in pineapples and bananas, in tropical fruits, but in recent years, we've expanded to all sorts of different products. So we're in leafy greens, we're in tree fruits like apples and cherries. We certify a lot of different nuts, hazelnuts and almonds and walnuts. We are working on some projects around hemp and textiles. So it really is a universal standard that, looks at I don't know, pretty much every sustainability topic that you can imagine. And part of the reason that we've been seeing a lot of growth in the program is that it provides a really robust roadmap for growers to follow, right? It gives farms a plan and a process for continuous improvement so that they can trust that through following the practices required by the program, they are doing their best to be a sustainable operation and be forward looking. Our program has been growing at a really quick or rapid rate over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, where we're growing at 30 or 40% a year. And part of the driver there is retailer acceptance. And I would say in the last year or so, we've seen a shift from sustainability programs like Sustainably Grown being a good to have and a product differentiator to being a need to have in meeting retailer demands in particular. There are whole markets that are not available unless you get a certification like Sustainably Grown. And for our early adopters, those players that have been certified for 8, 10, 15 years, they were using it as a differentiator, right? They wanted to stand out in the market. And we're seeing a lot of inquiries now and a lot of new clients who are just trying to meet the requirements of retailers. And the challenge here is really that there's a shifting landscape in terms of which retailer wants which program and which retailer accepts which program. And we're seeing regular, I guess, new acceptance from retailers. Just Friday, we got word from Lidl, which is the largest retailer in Europe, that they are now accepting Sustainably Grown for Costa Rican pineapples. And they're interested in expanding the scope of what products they accept. But they, on principle, accept the Sustainably Grown program. And that's a new thing, right? And I guess a big part of my job and my role in sort of the business development of the standard is getting that market pull through and getting that retailer acceptance. And that's part of the work that we do on the back end to bring value for our certified growers, that they know that we're working to increase acceptance of the standard, increase that market pull through. Next, I think it's a good time to move on to the revision of the standard. We took our time with this and we really put a lot of effort into moving from version 2.2 to version 3.0. And it took us 3 years. It was a rigorous process. We didn't take our time. I guess we used a lot of feedback from our existing growers, from retailers, to craft a standard that doesn't just meet the requirements now of the market, but sets up our growers to have acceptance in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time. Because the sustainability space is quickly shifting. It's new, and it's sort of a moving goalpost, to use a sports analogy. So we have to really be forward thinking in the development, and we work closely with a range of stakeholders to get this program where we are. And that has brought some significant changes, and Alex is going to jump into that. So starting off, the organizational structure has been changed in a big way, and that starts with conformance. So Alex, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. As many of you are familiar with version 2.2, the way that it was set up was we had required general and optional indicators, and you needed 100% of the required indicators and then could pick and choose 80% of the general and 20% of the optional in order to reach full conformance with the requirements of the standard. we've changed that structure so that in version 3, all of the indicators are required. Some of these indicators will come into effect in future years, but for a given year, if an indicator is listed, then it's going to be required. One of the things that this does is it helps the auditors focus on what really matters during your audit, so that they're not auditing 100% of those optional indicators for which you only need a 20% conformance rate. So it really lets them get into what you are doing rather than checking a list of boxes, and it lets us be more efficient with our time and with your time. We've also added a number of Trailblazer recognition claims, and these are taking the place of that sort of optional idea where you can elect to pursue one of these Trailblazer recognition claims. They're not required, but if you do meet the requirements for that claim, then it gives you an extra ability to add a claim to the sustainably grown claim. Go next. As you saw the section on the formatting, we've also changed the format for our sections. In version 2.2, we had it separated into general, environmental, social, and economic. For version 3, we're looking to follow more of an ESG framework. So we have a section on business integrity, that's our governance section. Sustainable farming practices is our environmental section, and ethical stewardship is our social section. Next. So here you see our list of Trailblazer recognition options. So these are all elective, they're not required, but we have some additional criteria if you want to be certified as a regenerative farming operation, if you want us to certify that you're paying workers a living wage or taking extra activity for worker empowerment, community development, or to support biodiversity. So these are add-on criteria that will be found throughout the standard at these locations. And if your operation meets these standards and you get audited to these criteria, then it allows you to put an additional recognition claim on your product if you so choose.
I'll just chime in here too, that a lot of these we saw as sort of where the market is going, but we didn't feel like we could require them. So things like living wage, we're seeing certain retailers, especially in Europe, willing to pay more for products that are, you know, certified as the farm workers are being paid a living wage. But pricing on food is there's always downward pressure, and we didn't feel like as a voluntary standard we could require it, because it would put our certified clients at a disadvantage in those markets where there's not a premium being paid. So we felt like this was a sort of, you know, compromise, but a more elegant solution to meeting the requirements of certain markets or certain retailers without making this program a burden for all of our clients.
Yeah, thank you. So getting into some of the changes that we've made in the standard, we're going to start with the business integrity section. So we have expanded sustainability plan requirements, and we've created a guidance document to help you navigate this. But in version 2.2, there was a requirement that there are a number of plans in place, and we've made that more explicit and clearly communicated in version 3. So there will need to be a quality assurance plan, a crop planting and diversity plan, a chain of custody plan, a biodiversity management plan, a water resource management plan, and a pest management plan. And the guidance document that we've created will let you know everything that needs to be required within each of those. So we're increasing the amount of kind of displayable documentation that's required, but we're also looking to hold your hand through this process and make it less daunting. Into the financial management side of things, we have 2 indicators at this point, which if you remember from version 2.2, the economic section was rather large. However, that section was largely optional. So now we have a requirement that the producer shall have a methodology for measuring the financial health of its operation, and the producer shall develop an annual financial plan. Version 2.2 required an annual balance sheet and profit loss statement, which when it comes to sharing financial data can get a little bit sensitive. So this shift is a way that we can get to what's really important that we're looking for, making sure that you're able to measure your financial health, make sure that this operation is able to continue into the future, and that you're doing the budgeting and planning to make sure that costs are not going to overrun going into future years. Version 2.2 also looked at annual reporting processes, rent agreements, and succession planning, and we've removed those sections from the standard in the sake of streamlining. Into the environmental section, the sustainable farming practices. We have a new requirement for tracking soil conservation. So 3214 through 3216 progress. So 3214 sets the baseline for establishing a baseline soil organic matter or soil organic carbon level. 3215 involves a retesting of that level in a way that's comparable to the baseline data so you can assess changes over time. And then 3216 is the analysis of the information from 3215, where if a decrease in soil organic matter is noted, then you do a root cause analysis and implement remediation measures. So this is really getting into a theory of change and a measure and improvement process for soil organic matter. We also have a water quality risk assessment requirement where there's an annual risk assessment needed related to the operation's water use. And it may be that year to year, some of this information does not change, but at the same time, it's important to have that touch point and make sure that these points are being noted. So looking at sources of contamination, efficiency of distribution systems, water quality for irrigation, and impacts on the water quality from farming operations, as well as the wastewater discharge. We've also done a fair amount of work on the air quality and emissions. So in version 3, having a carbon footprint calculation is going to be required. In version 2.2, this was a general level indicator, so only 80% of those indicators needed to be met. The standard now has another indicator that explicitly addresses climate resilience, because looking at global trends, it's no longer going to be enough just to try to stave off the effects of climate change. We're seeing those effects in real time, and making sure that your operations are going to be able to endure those anticipated changes is going to be important. We've also added in indicator 3421 that states that within 5 years of certification, and this is certification to version 3, the producer's production operation shall be third-party certified as a climate neutral farming operation. And we have some notes here, some caveats. So the phase-in period may be adjusted to account for crop-specific or local considerations. And for on-product climate neutral claims, a farm-to-market scope is required. So if you're going to say on your product that it's climate neutral, then it needs to include farm-to-market. But for the SG certification, then farm-to-gate is sufficient. This has been put in because as part of that forward-looking aspect that Kevin mentioned earlier, where we see that this is something that's becoming significantly more important. It's a matter of deep discussion, and we want to make sure that anybody who's getting sustainably grown certified is on the right path in addressing these changes before they occur, so that it's not a surprise when it becomes required by the market. We're also establishing limits to land clearing. So We have the two-part section here where since September 2014, the producer shall not have engaged in the clearing of critical habitats, including wetlands, native grasslands, peatlands, or forests. And then 3624 is the land on which the producer operates shall not have been cleared within 5 years before the initial audit. So what this does is it creates a point in time from which the person who's operating the land shall not have engaged in clearing that habitat, but it also sets up a precedent so that if somebody else has done mass deforestation and then the producer moves in to operate land, then that would also not be eligible for sustainably grown certification. And this is to try to close any potential loopholes in our system. We also have some expanded wildlife protections. We now require producers to describe the effects of their operation on flora and fauna in the natural ecosystem. This, similar to the climate calculations, was formerly a general level indicator, and it is now required. Into the ethical stewardship side, so this is the worker protection aspect. We have an expanded flexibility on work hours. So 4211 states that the producer shall ensure that working hours for non-supervisory workers conform to the following requirements: compliance with national or local laws, work hours not exceeding 48 hours excluding overtime, and where legally allowed, working hours in excess of 60 hours per week are documented and recorded in the audit report. This is one of our learning points from version 2.2, where we found that there were a number of situations in which workers wanted to work more than the limits that were set, and they would happily sign agreements to do that extra work. And in some cases, threaten to go to other producers if they were not allowed to do the extra work, especially in seasonal agricultural systems where you have a busy harvest season with high work hours that may be in excess of the 3-week limit that was given for version 2.2. So in this case, we have a limit on normal working hours, so overtime can exceed that. And we have some transparency where if we have workers working more than 60 hours per week, then there's notes on this in the audit report. So there's transparency there. But we're not setting a cap on the number of hours that workers can work in the way that we were doing previously. And that's in the interest of the workers, because if workers leave a certified client to go work for someone else who doesn't have a limit on the number of hours they can work, then they would also not be benefiting from many of the other worker rights protections offered by the standard. We also have expanded requirements on living wages. Note that we had a trailblazer requirement or a trailblazer claim stating that workers are paid a living wage, but that's optional. It's something that you can opt for. But for everybody in the sustainably grown system, within 1 year of certification and years thereafter, then the producer shall assess the regional living wage levels and the gap between living wage and actual wage paid to workers. So this is an assessment for the sake of building your knowledge on your operations and on wage levels. And it allows you to look at what's being paid and what that living wage is, and determine whether or not it's feasible for you to make that jump to paying a full living wage if it's not already being done. We also have some expanded protections for parents. We have a requirement that nursing mothers have a private space and sufficient breaks to accommodate nursing needs, and that workers are offered the same or equivalent position and pay rate upon return from maternity, paternity, and family leave. So this is to make sure that there's no repercussions for using leave options that should be protected. We also have some expanded protections against forced labor, and this one's a minor change, but this version states that the producer shall ensure that no forced labor, slave labor, bonded labor, indentured labor, convict labor, or other forms of undue pressure are used by the agricultural production operation. The version 2.2 indicator only prohibited involuntary convict labor. And in looking at the state of convict labor and the actual relationships that take place, we came to the conclusion that no convict labor would be permissible under the standard. So as an outcome of this revision process, we have about 110 fewer indicators than we had in version 2.2. There's a more consistent requirement structure, which makes it much easier to communicate the standard's impact. Before, we had some questions as to whether, especially for the optional indicators, what exactly it meant to be sustainably grown certified, because if you only needed 20% of this long list, then it wasn't clear what was consistent from producer to producer. Same thing with the general indicators. If only 80% needed to be met, then one producer might have done their climate calculations and another one might have done an assessment of the impacts on native flora and fauna. But when it comes to communicating the impact of the standard, especially to a grocer, it wasn't necessarily clear which one of those would be done. So here we've created a standardized set of indicators that need to be met by all producers. And we've reduced the number of indicators involved so that auditors can really focus on the aspects of sustainability that matter.
And I would just throw out there too that there was real logic in the old standard because we were trying to be adaptable to different regions, different growing conditions, and having, say, like the same water requirements for Guatemala and California proved challenging. And we had that's part of why we took such a long time with this revision process, was we were really went indicator by indicator and word by word in trying to craft it in a way that it could be applied to, conditions where like, say, water resources are very different. I think we've done a good job in that, but part of that tiered conformance structure before was to allow that flexibility. To Alex's point, though, we got feedback from retailers where, like, they didn't, even with a single crop, they didn't know whether one sustainably grown strawberry was the same as another sustainably grown strawberry or pineapple or almond or whatever. So, we took that feedback and have moved towards this other version. But I think there was a rationale behind the old approach. We just think this is a clearer and better process.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. That's the conclusion of our presentation. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
And you do need to type those into the question box. While those are coming in, just a couple other things to mention. We will be conducting a similar webinar in Spanish, hopefully towards the end of this month. It'll be similar content, but for looking at our attendee list today, I know we've got a lot of clients here in Latin America, so we will do a translated version in the coming weeks. I guess also, now that Sustainably Grown is updated, we are working on a revision and harmonization of Veriflora, where it's going to be pretty closely aligned to the new Sustainably Grown and will benefit from that market pull through that we've gained with Sustainably Grown. I think we can find some real opportunities for the Veriflora program in being sort of two sides of the same coin in terms of content. So looking at questions, just a few in here. First, how long does it take to get certified as Sustainably Grown? I mean, Alex, you might want to jump in here, but it really depends on the client and the preparedness. The process can take, a month or two, but we've had ones that take 6 months. And part of that is looking at how much time has to be spent for corrective action post audit, right? So when the auditor finds issues, how long does it take to get those non-conformities addressed? So varies quite a bit. Another question, when are we going to have the standard in Spanish? We're very close to having that. It's actually fully translated and ready to go. We've sent it over to the art department to put it into the same sort of pretty format that the US version is in, or the English version is in, excuse me. But I would hope by like the end of this week, we will have that. We're also translating all of our supporting documents, and those should be done in a similar time frame. We are also translating into French. We've got a lot of demand in French-speaking countries, particularly in Morocco and Tunisia. So we will have French versions of everything this year. We don't have a hard date on that one, but that one is coming up soon. Another question, carbon footprint is only for farm or also for processing? So depends on the claim being made. The standard itself, the scope is the farming operation. So that's going to be any on-site activities. So that could be pack houses, that could be mills, that could be, shelling operations. It really sort of depends on what the nature of the farm, I guess. For like off-site processing, that's only going to be included in the scope if you're going for an on-package claim for carbon neutrality. In terms of meeting the requirements of the standard, it's only farm to gate. So it's whatever is happening on the farming operation. Looking at other questions, limits to land clearing would perimeter farm maintenance fall under this? A perimeter weed management? No, we're looking at sort of old growth forests. We're looking at clearing of habitats that have not been cleared before. Weed management is not part of that. It's that's not included under that requirement. And Alex, go ahead and jump in if I'm missing anything.
No, I think that's sufficient.
Next question, when does this version go into effect against company audits? So it's available now. We're in a transition period where we've sort of got a grace period for growers. For new operations, new clients, they need to start being audited under version 3.0 next month, starting April 1st. For existing clients, we've gave them an extra few months. I think July, was it start of Q3?
Yes.
So yeah, so July is when it goes into effect for our existing clients. For those existing clients, there is going to be some legwork, especially on the governance section, where they're going to have to write out more of their policies and procedures. But I think it's going to be a easier process once that is done, just because there are so many fewer indicators, right? To go from 375 to 200 is pretty significant. So there's going to be some work with any changes, is work, but I think it's going to be generally a positive process for most of our existing clients. Next question, is it possible for you to share the presentation? Yeah, absolutely. That's not a problem. I'll work with our marketing manager, Shama, to get that sent over. So yeah, no problem there. Next question, what about the approach of the agricultural sustainability plan? SCS is going to provide a template, question mark. Yes, we are working on that. I think that's, Alex, that's done already, right? We've got that template.
Yeah, that's
the template is created. So we will be posting all of that on our website in the next week or two. Next question. When you mentioned the SG audit is accepted in US by multiple retailers, Costco, Walmart, etc., what level of acceptance is this exactly? Accepted for ethical and social responsible sourcing compliance? For example, Costco recognizes fair trade and EFI for premium programs, but I'm unaware about Costco's level of recognition for sustainably grown in terms of supplier compliance. Yeah, great question. So it varies by retailer. For Walmart, we meet their IPM and biodiversity requirements. They've got a 2025 requirement around that sustainably grown is in the basket of standards that's met there. We also meet their ethical charter for, I forget the name of it. They just call it the ethical charter. Ethical charter for responsible recruitment, maybe. We're aligned with that, so we meet those requirements. We do not meet the social compliance requirements. For that, we recommend looking at SMETA or another social program to meet that. Those expectations are not annual, so that's sort of when the buyer says, hey, you're due for your next social audit, that would be when you go do SMETA if you're doing sustainably grown. For Costco, sustainably grown replaces the annual, I forget what it's called, the Costco Code of Conduct audit. The names get mixed up in my head. Sustainably grown does meet that requirement and means you don't have to do the independent Costco audit. It's not part of the program with premiums like EFI and fair trade, but we've built in some of that into those trailblazer claims, and we're in discussions with retailers all the time on that front. So it might be that we are able to get that level of recognition with Costco in this version of the standard. We kind of wrote some of those in, those optional trailblazer claims as getting there, right? If you combine the living wage with the some of the other social trailblazers, they might see that as meeting their expectations. ¿Tiene opción de idioma español? Yes, absolutely. I guess I should be answering that in Spanish, but yeah, we will have everything in Spanish in the next week or two. Almost all of our auditors are Spanish speakers, both in US and Canada, but also we got local auditors in most of Latin America as well. So yes, definitely. I believe that covers all of the questions. Thank you all for that level of engagement. If you have follow-up questions, oh, we got one more. Are you going to prepare a guide of interpretation? Yes, we will eventually. Part of that is we need to see where the questions are in the standard, and we'll take feedback from certified clients as they're preparing for the standard where they need more clarification. We'll develop that, or when auditing the new standard, when there's confusion, we'll certainly build out interpretation guidance. I think some of that's part of the revision process is we built all of the old interpretation guidance into the indicators. So we tried to make it much more clear what we were looking for in the actual language of the indicators. So there was less room for confusion. That being said, there's always room for confusion, and we recognize that. So we don't have interpretation guide yet, but that's one that we will develop this year and continue to update and improve.
We've actually begun that process already by having one of our auditors who is not involved in the revision process give the standard a read, and in the hopes of identifying anything that might need interpretation. So the interpretation guide will be a little bit more of a living document where we're able to add things as time goes on and we find new things that could use clarification.
Yeah, good point. The standard itself is sort of a every 5-year revision process, but all the supporting documents are living and will continue to evolve. Well, again, thank you all for your time today. I appreciate your joining us. If you have specific questions that you want answered, please do reach out to us. We're always happy to hop on a call or talk via email. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.